This is the end of Hamas. Israel's new strategy of flooding out tunnels could finally destroy Hamas once and for all. But do the potential long-term risks outweigh the short-term military benefits? Since the full-scale invasion of Gaza started, the Israeli military has identified 800 tunnel shafts and wiped out at least 500 of them to date. However, with over 300 miles of tunnels and potentially thousands of tunnel shafts, the Israeli military still has a long time to go. Combining this with the fact that Hamas fighters still regularly use tunnels underneath Gaza to carry out ambushes against Israeli troops far behind the front lines shows that these tunnels are still very much a threat to the Israelis. Because of the slow-going nature of taking out tunnels, Israeli military leaders have started preparations for an ambitious plan to flood all the tunnels underneath Gaza. As reported by various news outlets like the Wall Street Journal and NBC, the Israeli military already appears to have this plan in motion. Over the past several weeks, the Israelis have set up 5 giant water pumps in the northern part of Gaza. Along the beaches outside of Gaza City, open-source satellite images show that Israeli troops have set up at least 6 pipes that run from the sea, over the beach, and into artificial reservoirs by the city. These images, dated at the end of November, had to have been done by the Israelis since images taken earlier in the invasion do not show these pipes or reservoirs. Based on these images and the testimony of anonymous officials familiar with Israeli plans, here is what we know about this strategy. Because many of the tunnel shafts are interconnected, it is a viable strategy that starting at the beginning of the system will flood the rest of it. Based on an average pump rate of several thousand cubic meters of water per hour, the Israelis hope to pump several million cubic meters of seawater into the tunnels. Overall, it would take 3 to 4 weeks to pump this much water into what is known as the Gaza Metro. It is important to note that as the writing of this video, Israel has yet to decide one way or the other on actually doing this. It is known that the Israeli government has briefed the US government on its intentions, but the final decision to actually flood the tunnels has not been made yet. But for argument's sake, let's say Israel does choose to flood the tunnels completely. What are the possible ramifications of such a decision? The most obvious risk of flooding out the tunnels is the killing of any remaining Israeli hostages. Estimates vary, but most sources believe Hamas has around 120 to 140 hostages remaining in their custody. As reports from survivors whom Hamas released during the ceasefire, Hamas terrorists almost exclusively hid hostages in the tunnels. Flooding out the tunnel system basically guarantees that none of these victims will ever make it out alive. Another crucial factor that is weighing heavily against Israel to flood the tunnels is the destruction of Gaza's water supply. There's only one primary source of Gazan-produced water. Along the beaches in the northern part of the Strip, there is an underground aquifer that supplies most of the Strip's drinking water. While Gazans can produce some of their own water through desalination and natural rain runoff that is collected, Israel provides most of the water to this aquifer. However, after the Hamas invasion of southern Israel, the Israelis cut off the water. While the Israelis later turned some of the water back on due to international pressure, the fact remains that the storage area for this water is still under great threat. Since the war started, it is estimated that 97% of Gaza's water does not meet World Health Organization standards. Because the ground underneath Gaza is mostly porous sandstone and sand, pumping huge amounts of salt water under the ground risks further contaminating Gaza's only aquifer to the point it could never be used again. Beyond potentially destroying Gaza's water supply for generations to come, flooding the tunnels also threatens agriculture in the Strip. Despite being small, Gaza still hosts a relatively robust agricultural industry. Because of the poor economy, many Gazan civilians turn to subsistence farming to feed their families and make a little extra money. Products like strawberries, watermelons, dates, and olives are all popular crops grown in the area. Because Hamas hides tons of weapons, ammunition, and explosives inside the tunnels, along with precursor chemicals to make them, flooding the tunnels could have a devastating effect on the agricultural industry. This is because runoff from flooded tunnels could seep into the soil of the Strip and contaminate it with all the nasty chemicals from arms and ammunition Hamas stores in its tunnels. Another crucial factor that is making Israel think twice is the potential to destroy civilian infrastructure more so than it already has done. By the end of November, it was estimated that around half of all Gaza's apartments and homes had been damaged or destroyed. Further adding to this destruction could be the collapse of buildings because of flooded tunnels. Since Hamas chooses to put tunnels underneath and inside civilian infrastructure like homes, hospitals, and schools, flooding the tunnel system poses a considerable risk of collapsing this already fragile infrastructure. If tunnel systems collapse because of the flooding, it could basically create giant sinkholes underneath innocent civilians. This would inevitably cause civilian casualties, as well as complicate rebuilding efforts for years to come. Despite all these adverse side effects, is flooding the tunnels really better than what Israel is currently doing to destroy them? Currently, the Israeli military has a variety of tactics it uses to demolish Hamas tunnels. The most devastating are the GBU-28 bunker buster bombs. While these are incredibly effective at penetrating even the most hardened underground tunnels, they have the risk of causing huge collateral damage to civilian homes and infrastructure. Because of this, the last confirmed use of these bombs came from the 2014 operation in Gaza and not the current one. Another way Israeli troops can demolish tunnels is through the more conventional means of explosives. However, simply blowing up tunnel entrances doesn't necessarily mean the tunnel is now sealed off. Hamas fighters normally build numerous shafts branching off a tunnel. Additionally, putting explosives inside a tunnel shaft runs the risk of creating secondary explosions from ordnance Hamas terrorists have put down there. Israel has also used combat engineers to do their own construction work on tunnel entrances to seal them off. It's common for troops to bulldoze tunnel entrances with earth or fill them with wet concrete. These tactics are certainly good because they cause no damage to existing civilian infrastructure and do not create secondary explosions. However, the main drawback of these methods is that they're slow, time-consuming, and leave Israeli forces vulnerable to attack, which has already been documented numerous times. Since the full-scale ground war started, Israel has used several innovative methods of discovering and taking out the tunnels. It's been well documented that Israeli troops send drones and attack dogs into tunnels to hunt for terrorists. While the methods have proven successful, the main drawback is that they can only be used in shallow tunnel shafts. It has been widely reported that many Hamas tunnel shafts can be 30, 40, and sometimes up to several hundred feet deep. Dropping drones or dogs down these shafts is not survivable, so they can't be used on these deeper ones. Lastly, Israel has used so-called sponge bombs to seal off entrances. This small grenade can be carried and thrown by one soldier. Instead of explosives, it releases a ton of foam that quickly fills a tunnel entrance and hardens, rendering it unusable. But while this technology has been reported to have been used on the battlefield, there has been no photographic evidence of its use thus far, and some speculate that it is still an experimental weapon in testing. So with that being said, is the Israeli plan to flood Gaza's tunnels worth it? According to some Israeli officers in charge of destroying Hamas tunnel complexes, at the current rate of destruction, it would take at least several more months of fighting to wipe out all the tunnels. If Israel flooded all the tunnels, it could destroy Hamas in just a fraction of the time, thereby saving thousands of more civilian lives from being taken in further offensive operations. Because of this, as long as Israel fully commits to a reconstruction of Gaza after the war, such as rebuilding homes and reestablishing a fresh water supply, the potential to save tens of thousands of civilian lives, kill tens of thousands of terrorists, and bring the war to a conclusion sooner is probably worth it from both a military and humanitarian standpoint. Bye for now.